name is Darla Swan. I work in the Academic Resource Center as a learning consultant, and I'm also a licensed psychologist. And when I was in college, I was also a 1GLI student.
And I am Suzanne Criffo. I am a learning consultant and the math specialist in the Academic Resource Center. So today we're going to talk to you all about strategies for taking notes, and really excited that we have the opportunity for you to put them into practice today. So we started with introductions that we just did. Then we're going to get into why a discussion of why you believe and we believe note-taking is important. We'll talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of note-taking and certain methods that have proven effective. And then after the lecture, we'll have a little bit of a discussion and we'll talk to you about services at the Academic Resource Center. So first, I want to hear from you all. Why do you think note-taking is important? Or from your past experience, why is note-taking important? Or why do you expect it to be important at Duke? So you can share by unmuting yourself, you can share in the chat, or you can choose view options and then annotate and annotate directly on the slide.
I'll now be monitoring the chat and I'll read out anything that shows up for you, Suzanne.
Thanks.
I think if you annotate, it's anonymous, if that helps on the slide.
I'm actually not sure if it is. Oh, is it? Okay. So we have connect more deeply with material.
And in the chat, we have, it helps you condense information from lectures.
Awesome.
Taking notes helps you retain information. Oh, here's a good one. It helps with active listening. Setting the notes on a later date helps you retain information.
I love that.
These are great.
No, yeah. What do you do with notes if you don't use them later?
Excellent. I think that's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for participating, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and clear annotations so that we don't have to see them on future slides. So what does the research say about why good note-taking is important? So a lot of what you all pointed out, but taking good notes increases your focus during class. It helps you stay engaged in class, which is incredibly important, especially as you might be sitting in a large lecture class that you might not be used to from high school. It increases your comprehension of the material. I think that was perhaps the one that was on the whiteboard, better retention of the material, and it helps with recall. And so recall is the ability to remember any of the material that you learned in a lecture. It also decreases your stress, especially stress leading up to an exam, and it helps you better prepare for those exams. It has also been shown to increase GPA, and very interesting, it changes your brain connections. So actually the neural connections within your brain change, and as these neural connections change, that's what we refer to as learning, because that's how you deepen your ability to recall the information, and you strengthen all of those different connections to really show that you've learned the material. Thoughts, questions, concerns about this? Okay.
Nothing in the chat. So
in order to take good notes, it's important to improve your listening skills. So you won't be able to take good notes if you're not able to take in the material that you are listening to. So rather than what I sometimes did was I felt like I was basically just a recording device, right? I would listen to a lecture and write down every single word that the professor said, because oh, the professor is brilliant and I can't miss a single word that the professor says. However, that's not the most effective way of taking notes, because you're just letting it flow through you rather than already starting that learning process and already starting to work with the material so that you can work to change those connections in your brain. And so we encourage you to be a thinker, not just a recorder in class. So that means listen to what's being stated or review what's on the slide and then write. And I really encourage you to try to write in your own words to start. And if you don't do it when you're taking notes in class, then maybe that's part of your, and we'll talk about this later, your note processing after class. I teach math. And so I often think about there is math and then there's my understanding of it. And there's that translation, and that occurs in my note taking, translating from math to Suzanne's language. And so with any subject, making sure that your note taking lets you translate into your own words. And it's also important in the sense of not being just a recorder and being a thinker. It's important to be selective in what notes you're taking. And there's a lot of ways to help you figure out how to be selective with your notes. I really encourage you, and this is all stuff that we can talk in more depth in learning consultation, which we'll again talk to you later about, but I encourage you to do a little bit of prep before class so you know what's important and what's sort of more detail that might not be as important to record. So that's what I mean when I say be selective in what you record. You'll figure out what is important, what is the meat. And yeah, we said don't just transcribe, and make sure you're using active note taking strategies. So a lot of that I talked about when you're listening and then writing, but also including pictures in your notes. They're your notes. No one is going to tell you what you can and cannot do with them. So include pictures. And there's research that shows when you encode in both words and pictures, you're able to retain the information better compared to just writing alone. I loved having a margin on the side of my notes where I kept sort of a running commentary, which was often a little funny. And so when I was looking at my notes later, I was laughing at myself because of my ridiculous things, but it also allowed me to put a star if I think, oh, the professor said this is a really important point, so maybe it's going to be on a test. Or, oh, this is a really great concept. I really want to include this in that paper I'm writing right now. Or if there's a gap, or I don't think any of you will fall asleep, but like, what if you fall asleep or you miss part of the lecture and you have a gap in your notes? Then making sure you write a note to yourself, ask Molly about this after class. Or put a question mark when you don't fully understand what's happening and you know you want to return to that so that you can figure it out or ask about it in office hours. Any questions on this slide? Any concerns? Any additions that you think we're missing here? All right.
Nothing in the chat.
So in terms of actually taking your notes, it's important to choose your method, whether that's pen and paper. I know a lot of people are using maybe their computers or an iPad or something to take their notes. So choose your method that works best for you. There is research that shows that taking notes with pen and paper can be beneficial, but it's whatever works best for you for whichever class you're in. It might change from class to class. Sometimes the professors provide slides ahead of time. So maybe you want to take notes on the slides. So it's something that it would be helpful to set aside some time when you have the syllabus to really think about, how do I want to take notes for this class? And that's, again, something you can come and talk to one of us in the ARC about. Make sure that your notes are organized. You could start each lecture on a new page and then you can space them all out and see them all at once. We encourage, let's say the professor allows you to record or is recording their lecture on their own. Maybe create a timestamp throughout your notes so that you can refer back to it as necessary. Try to take notes consistently in a predetermined format. However, if halfway through the semester, you're like, this note-taking method isn't working for me, change it. no one's going to be checking your notes necessarily. And so you want to make sure that your note taking is what works best for you. Something I was horrible at when I was taking notes, and I would definitely change if I were to go back to class now, is to leave space in your notes. I was like, I'm going to save all of the trees in the world, so I'm going to use every ounce of this paper in my note taking. But then when I was reworking my notes later, I had no space left over for my thoughts that came up later or connections I made to other material. So definitely leave space for corrections, questions, additions. I encourage you to maybe only use one side of the paper for your notes. So then the other page could be your after class processing space. And again, make these notes your own, write them in your own words. Maybe you can develop a system of abbreviations and symbols so that you don't feel you need to, so you can feel you can capture more material, but do so while you're abbreviating. I know I talk fast and I threw out a lot of material at you. Thoughts? Questions? No? I usually am more interactive. I'm sorry, people, I'm off my game. So I'm going to pass it to Darla. Maybe she's on her game more.
I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I want to stop for a minute before I address this slide, but so I have juniors. I have twins who are going to be seniors in high school in a month. And so I kind of come at this also as a parent of a high school student who knows that transition is coming up really soon. And one of the reasons we chose note-taking as an important first learning skill to talk about today, before you've even had your first class, is that Duke classes you're going to experience are quite different from high school. In most high school classes, there's like a pretty strict curriculum and a textbook that you have as sort of like a nice reference material. In Duke, you are going to find a lot of variety in the way that professors teach their courses, the platforms that they use, the amount of reading, and many of them won't even have textbooks. I was like textbook reliant kind of person. I like the structure of the textbook. I knew I could always go back to the textbook and find anything I wanted. So when I got to grad school and college and I was in those classes that were more less structured and information was coming from maybe a scholarly journal article and a video and some other, book chapter and lots of different types of sources, I struggled a little bit to adjust because I just used to it. And so what we want you to understand is this is a learning process for every incoming first year student. This is the things that we're talking about today are to help kind of get you thinking about how you're going to have to make some changes to the way you did it in high school. And it's a learning process. It's going to take you, a couple of semesters, to really figure out what works best for you. And like Suzanne mentioned, you're going to have maybe different ways that you like to do it for a class that's STEM versus a humanities or a social science, so you're going to have different ways that are going to work differently for you. So kind of having a lot of tools in your toolbox to make you more flexible and more adaptable is kind of what we're kind of encouraging you to do, and just to be experimental. I think there's a question in the chat about what did it say, Suzanne, taking notes?
The question is, how do you feel about digital note-taking? Do you notice Duke students having a preference between that or paper?
So it's a great question. So like Suzanne alluded to earlier, there is research that says that the physical act of writing is better for long-term retention. That being said, some of you may already be like, my kids can type 120 words a minute. They're just it's so much more efficient for them. In humanities, those kind of classes, but in a STEM class, they're going to have to write. So I think you're probably going to find you're going to have to do both. And I will say that because of the research on laptop use in classes, as far as the distractions for students, and we've seen a trend at Duke where some professors are not letting you bring a laptop into class, so you will have to write in those classes. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's the minority. It's not the majority of classes, but there is a little bit of a trend particularly in smaller classes. Does that answer your question okay? Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. All right, cool. And iPads, I will say iPads have become the new, there's a huge uptick last year in the use of iPads on campus. This slide is just going to give you some ideas of some of the main things that you're going to want to pay attention to with that selective listening while you're in lecture, and remembering like the kinds of things that you're going to want to take notes on. After this, I will also forward to Sechelle and Beatrice some note-taking handouts, and it includes a one-page, 2 columns of standard abbreviations that you guys can learn to use for your own note-taking. It will just make you more efficient and faster with note-taking. And then feel free to add your own and just kind of develop it, you know, as you go along with whatever works for you. But you're going to want to, you don't want to write full sentences, right? You want to be like fast, as quick as you can to get things down. You don't want to write down things you already know, or that you know is perfectly described on page 64 in the textbook. You can just write, see page 64 in your notes. You don't have to like recreate the whole thing. But these are some of the things that you're going to want to listen for. And remember also that if the professor's talking about it in class, there's a good chance it's going to be on a midterm. So, you know, the professor's going to give you a lot of clues in the way that they share the information with you as to what's important and what's not. Questions? Okay, I think we can move on to the next one, Suzanne. So there are actually 6, 7, 8, maybe 9 now note-taking methods in the literature, and we're gonna talk about 3 today. Some of you have probably heard of some of these when you were in high school. And did anybody hear about the Cornell method, or were explicitly taught that when they were in high school? I bet some people, yeah. But these 3 that we're going to present today, we thought, oh good, some people have, okay. We thought were kind of a nice combination to cover sort of different types of courses. But again, there's more than one way, and I think you'll find that many people kind of do hybrid approaches, and we're going to show you an example of a scientist, a pre-health person's notes in a minute, and how they kind of did a hybrid. So really, you're going to be developing this for yourself. I'm going to, sorry, Suzanne's going to have to, you're going to have to click that little video, and it stops Suzanne at like 3 minutes and 10 seconds.
Okay, let me, oopsies, there we go. Let me do a new share and share sound. Can you all see this page now? Thank you for those of you that I see nodding and thumbs up. All right, so 3 minutes, 20 seconds, is that what you said?
3:10, I think it's 3:10.
3:10. I'm gonna need a thumbs up or a nod if you can hear it.
What is the best system for taking notes in class? Well, luckily for you, I did the research, and it turns out that there are 5 different note-taking systems that are generally accepted to be pretty darn good. And of course, I will be representing these note-taking systems with Street Fighter characters, because why not? So, the 5 note-taking systems I'm going to go over in this video include the outline method, the Cornell method, the mind map method, the flow method, and the write on the slides method. The first note-taking system on my list is the outline method. I've chosen Ryu to represent it because the outline method is straightforward, based on hierarchy, disciplined, and overall very simple. In fact, you couldn't get more simple than the outline method unless you were just straight up writing paragraph notes down, and if you think that's gonna be a good note-taking method, well, things are not gonna work out for you. So the outline method is a note-taking system that's based on bullet points and hierarchy. Basically, to take outline style notes, you simply create top-level bullet points of all the main points in the lecture. Then you make lower-level bullet points to fill out all the details. If you're taking outline notes on paper, it's a good idea to either space out your main bullet points or summarize them at the top if your professor goes through them, and then make new bullet points that are more detailed down the line. However, if you're taking these notes on a computer like I always did in a program like Evernote or Byword or another word processor, you can easily go back, add new bullet points, and format things without having to mess up the structure of your document too much. So honestly, for the outline method, I think using a computer is a perfect approach. The second note-taking method on my list is the Cornell method, and I've chosen Chun-Li to represent it because she's got multiple kicks and it's got multiple sections. The Cornell method was developed by Walter Pock back in the 1950s, and it still holds up pretty well today. When you take your notes in the Cornell style, you divide your paper into 3 distinct sections. On the top of your paper, you'll have 2 different columns, the left one being the cue column, and the right one being the note-taking column. And underneath those 2 columns, you add another box for the summary. During class, you use the note-taking column on the right to write notes in a normal style. However, this is where the Cornell method deviates from other note-taking systems. As soon as you can after class, you write down questions or cues in the cue column. These are meant to help you review later. You also write down a summary of the lecture in the summary column. These 2 sections of the Cornell method, the summary and the cue column, they're both designed to help you build reviewable notes the first time you write them. That way you don't have to go back and rework your notes so much. Note-taking system number 3 is the mind map method. You know, it's been said that your mind is a map of the territory that is reality. So maybe by that logic, the mind map system is the perfect note-taking system. Actually, that doesn't make any sense at all. Either way, I chose Dalsim to represent the mind mapping system because he's a meditator and he's always focused on improving his mind. To begin a mind map, you simply take a blank piece of paper, draw a circle in the middle of it, and add the main topic of the lecture there. Then you'll start branching off little trees and adding subtopics. Eventually you'll have lots of little branches and you'll create a mind map. I never actually used mind maps for my class notes, but I have used them for blog post topics before. When I wanted to write a blog post on all the ways you could save money in college, I wanted to make sure I could cover all my bases. So I created a mind map.
Thank you, Suzanne. Next slide. There we go. Okay. Let me see. Let me know if there's anything in the chat. Okay, so he went through that pretty quickly. And again, this is an introduction, not to make you guys expert on note taking yet, but that's a great reason among many to visit the ARC and work with a learning consultant around your note taking skills. It's just one of many skills you're going to want to cultivate while you're a Duke student. This is a little bit of a different type of example than the one he showed on the outlining method. I'm guessing a lot of people have used the outlining method. Can we show like a hand or a raised hand from people and see if this look familiar to people? I'm seeing a lot of, okay, this one maybe. Does anybody want to, you can shout out loud or throw it in the chat. What types of courses might you think the outlining method might be sort of suited for? Do you have any ideas of maybe history? Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. That's definitely a great one. It's a great example. Anybody else? Okay.
I used it a lot for one of my biology classes just because it was a lot more structured for me.
Okay. Did that work for biology?
It was more of like a lecture style, so yeah. But for the labs, I didn't do that.
Okay. Yeah. So you noticed right away, Juliana, that for the lecture part, I might needed one method, but I needed a different method for the lab part, right? And then you were able to integrate those. So the fact that you have both of those tools, you knew how to do both, and you knew something about your own learning was a good thing. I remember very distinctly, I've had to take a lot of tests in my life just because of being a licensed psychologist. And I like the outlining method, but the one thing I don't like about the outlining method for me personally is that there's not enough visual information. And if I add something visual, even if it's like a table or columns or a diagram or something, when I sit down to take a test, I visually remember it better and I can kind of pull it up in my mind more easily. So that's kind of the thing that I just sort of learned over time about my learning. And so everybody's going to learn that about themselves as you kind of work through this over the next semester or two. Next slide, please, Suzanne. The Cornell method, I saw some people also had raised their hand that they had some familiarity with this. I know that I think it's become trendy in high schools because my kids were taught this as well. I personally have not used this, but I think Suzanne has some experience with something similar to this. And if anybody's out there wants to throw in the chat, or again, just talk up about their experience with this particular method, we'd love to hear it. Anybody? What about combined Cornell? Okay, so this student said they combine the Cornell method with outlines. That's a great idea. Anybody want to take maybe a stab? Okay, you were just answering the question I was just about to ask. I use the Cornell method for English classes. And somebody else is writing that they like, oh, it's going too fast. The Cornell method is the one I most through high school. I found it to be very effective in all of their classes. That's good. And the people who like the summary. Okay. And theater classes. All right, that's excellent. Suzanne is our STEM specialist. I want to ask you, I'm going to throw this at Suzanne for a minute. Does the Cornell method work for STEM courses?
I actually expand the Cornell method when I talk about it with my students. And instead of having the summary column just at the bottom, I make that the entire, well,
the whole page.
Part of the other page. And then the other page, you can also put example problems and explanations in your own words and concept maps or whatever seems, or charts. I love doing charts. The charting method is something we didn't talk about as well, but I love charting method. So yeah, I like the Q column a lot from Cornell method. I like to think of it as Jeopardy. You come up with a question that the notes is your answer to, and then that's something you can use to study later.
Awesome, thank you. All right, well, I think we have one more quick review of the mapping method. This one is probably the least familiar to high school students coming. Oh, does Jacob has his hand up? Have you used this one before?
I wanted to ask about your thoughts on doing notes again after class, because that's the way I've done it through high school. Is I'll write down just about everything I can during class, and then when I get home, I'll customize and make the notes the way I like them.
Well, then, Jacob, you're ahead of about 85% of probably most first-year incoming students. So that's wonderful. And although we didn't have time today, just because of limited time, what you're getting at is, so what we're talking about today is like the during class part, but what you're getting at is the after class, and that's note processing, we might call it, or whatever phrase that you want to talk about. And yes, the processing of notes after class, typically within 24 to 48 hours, mostly so that our brain doesn't forget it, is a really important way to solidify that information in your long-term memory so that you will be ready for midterms. And we found, and the research has shown that people who do that routinely, who consistently process their notes and do what you're saying, Jacob, like reprocess them in some way, fill in, make, associations, connections, reorganize them to say, oh, this information is really great for a chart. Let me make a chart out of this. You're processing that more deeply each time. The way that I think of this is so a lot of students will be like, I don't have time for that. But then you're going to spend more time studying for the midterm. If you do it after the class, that information is going to get in there now and start building, especially in those classes that have a lot of upward building type blocks in them, instead of this kind of learning, but this kind of learning. So you're already preparing a study guide. You're already preparing for the midterm every time you do that note processing, as opposed to waiting to 2 days before the midterm and then going back and looking at these notes, which I was completely guilty of doing as an undergrad. And then I wouldn't even know what half my notes said because it was so scribbled that I didn't remember the word, and I just had some really bad habits as an undergrad. So hopefully you guys won't have those. But come and talk to us at the ARC. We'll talk a little bit more about the ARC services after this, but I believe our guest lecturer is here.